when I came in to radio, we were physically splicing tape every day. You'd have like little razor marks, your hands would be cut up. We'd have an AP machine that was going all the time, and it would have printer paper that fed up through it. And we had meat hooks, and you'd put it on the different meat hooks that were labeled for national news or for state news or whatever the category was. That is not the environment that we have today. Although I got to tell you, we do have a typewriter stashed here, because if that electric goes out, I'm going to know how to do things.
She's prepared to report on the apocalypse.
I am. You send it my way, and those zombies, I'll be all over it.
Meat hooks, razor blades, and tape? No, we're not talking with a butcher, but rather a highly experienced, well-trained, and trusted journalist who's been covering the state of Ohio via radio, print, television, and internet for decades. Jo Ingles gives us a history lesson of the journalism profession and shares what it's like to be a real journalist these days in an era of fake news and self-appointed experts. That's all ahead on today's episode of Shooting the Shift. Hello, and welcome to Shooting the Shift, a venture here at Shiftology Communication, where our team of communication professionals take time to reflect, share, and provide insights into what we do every day to help our clients reach more, convince more, and win more. I'm Dan Toland, Director of Virtual Experiences here at Shiftology, and we're happy you're joining us for today's episode titled, Long Live Real Journalism.
Welcome, Jo Ingles, to the Shooting the Shift podcast. We're excited to have you. This is a complete role reversal from our relationship of the last 20 or 30 years, because I probably couldn't count on two hands the number of times that Jo has interviewed me or one of my charges or clients. But I think this is the first time that I've ever had the opportunity to invite you to be interviewed on our podcast. So welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
I know it's a busy time at the State House, at the state biennial budget heating up and heading into the last 30 days if we stay on track here this month. So thank you for taking an hour out of your day and this busy month to spend some time talking about journalism and where journalism is today.
One of my favorite subjects.
Something that's very important to us as public relations professionals, and have a lot of respect for journalists. I know PR pros have various opinions about journalism and where it is and how it should be, but I have found the relationship between public relations and journalism to be an essential part of my job and the success that we've had at Shiftology. So thank you for being one of those trusted journalists that we have had the opportunity to work with over the years. Help our viewers get to know you a little bit. What's a day in the life of a State House news reporter like, Jo? Tell us a little bit about your background and yourself.
Well, I've been 3 decades plus in this business, and I can tell you it has changed a lot. But typically now, my day, I cover the legislature and all things about the legislature. That means bills, legislation, reactions to bills and legislation. Right now, it means the budget. And that's a huge, heavy lift because it encompasses so much that affects so many Ohioans. And there are so many stories coming out of that budget and what's happening basically behind closed doors. We don't get to see all the give and take in that process. So, we're doing reactionary stories on it with people who are directly affected by the budget. I interview the people who are affected. I talk to them, I write stories, I produce the stories, I edit the stories, and I do it for TV, radio, web, and a podcast. And so every medium is different. I write a story completely different for TV than I would for radio, because in TV, I don't want to put the title of someone in what I'm saying, because I can throw up a title underneath when they're talking, so I can save a little bit of time there. And I don't want to be redundant. But if that's a radio story, you got to remember people can't read that title on radio. So you've got to give the title in there. That's just one little basic change. There's a lot of different changes because you're writing for different mediums and you're producing for different mediums. And so that takes a challenge. It's a challenge. It takes some time to really come up with those things. But I do that every day. And I also, in the evenings, I teach at Ohio Wesleyan University. I teach broadcast journalism. So I find that I stay pretty busy.
That's great. Ohio Wesleyan University, my grandmother's alma mater.
That's
That's
nice. Yeah.
yeah, a nice little connection there. So, how did you get into journalism, Jo? I'm not sure I even really know your backstory before I met you back in 2001, 2002.
Yeah, when I went to college with full intentions of being a teacher. I really wanted to teach. My mom had worked in the schools, and I really loved, being around that environment. And so I thought I wanted to be a teacher when I went to school. And I started taking classes and realized that I stink at math. I mean, if there's someone
We all do.
who can't add two and two, it's me. Okay. I'm horrible at it. And, I've
I think that's
tried.
why we all chose this
Yep.
profession.
Yeah, I think there's something to that because, I just remember I had tutors and I tried. I mean, that's one thing I failed at that I can truly say I tried as best I could and I still didn't get it. Jo Ingles and math do not match. So in my freshman year, I realized that quickly, and you have to have math courses to, get through the whole sequence that you need to take of classes. So I went to my advisor and I said, so what can I do that doesn't involve as much math? And when they said journalism, I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of fun. Yeah, that sounds good. So I'd like to say that it was some big lofty goal I had since the age of 5, but it really wasn't. But when you think
Come
about
full circle because
it
you do
is.
teach.
I do
And you teach every day in some way.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think that's the point of it. I think actually being a journalist, if you're a journalist, you're teaching people something they don't know about something they probably should know about. And so that is really the essence of teaching. It's just you teach it a little differently because you're teaching it in different mediums and you're not teaching one class every day or something like that. But I've been able to really enjoy the time that I've had, being able to do that, being able to create stories and interview people and be at the epicenter of some of the most interesting things that happen in society.
Truly. So I have to ask you, what are the most interesting, exciting stories that you had the opportunity to witness from a front row seat?
Well, the Lucasville prison riots, that was pretty interesting just because what you saw on TV was not what was going on with the reporters. We had a little teeny tiny Ford Escort, the station car. That was basically what I was using. I was down there for the first time 72 hours before I got out of there. It's 72 hours straight. And, basically living out of this little Ford Escort that, and it was raining down there. I don't know if you remember the weather, but there was a lot of rain at that time. And so our Escort got stuck in the mud and we couldn't move it anywhere. And so I basically had to live out of this Escort and I was at the mercy of other people who were kind enough to share a cup of coffee with me. And of course, I had a few snacks, but, it was really tough the first few days of that until we realized you're not getting out of there with a news car. So just give it up and, work on a plan B. So then we started, taking food down and we started making sure we had what we needed when we were there and that kind of thing. But there were so many fun kind of stories going on behind the scenes with the journalists. We really got to know each other and have some good times, like getting to talk, people in different companies and different your competition. Basically you're out there talking to them and you're making friends with them, and that was a positive that came out of the awful riot. I mean, the story itself was just awful, but we were able to find some positive in it from the way that we did things, and that was really one of the big things that happened. And of course, all of the different candidates that come in and visit, and you get to go cover those things. Those are interesting and fun in their own way. Each has a different story. I've always enjoyed that. It's just kind of being at the front row of history all the time. And I'm a history buff. I love history. And so it's, for me, I'm a big geek and that's my thing. I really enjoy that. And I do it every time I get the opportunity to do it.
Well, tell our viewers where your office is too.
Our office is on the first floor of the Ohio Statehouse. And if you think about the Ohio Statehouse, if you've been here, there's a floor that has a gift shop on it and it has the museum on it. That's the floor our office is in. And then across the hall, of course, there's Ohio Government Telecommunications. That's the Ohio Channel, as people probably know it. And, they provide, the streams of all the different legislative committees, and they keep a very nice archive of material that anyone can access. A lot of other states don't have that. But if you want to see what happened in the Judiciary Committee 2 months ago, you just go in and watch it, and you can watch it from beginning to end. And it's a real way of being accountable to the public. Ohio has been really on the leading edge in that way.
That's a really cool seat that you have there, to be able to sit right there as history is being made, whether you're in that nice office cubicle or in a Ford Escort in the mud. You've got to see it all. So a lot of changes have happened in the 20, 30 years that you've been at this. What have you seen? How have you seen journalism change for the better or for the worse over that time period?
Wow, that's a long question, and I could go on forever, but I'll give you the short version. When I came in to radio, we were still using China markers, if anyone knows what those are, and reel-to-reel tape and razor blades, and we were physically splicing tape every day. So you'd go home and you'd have like little razor marks, where you cut yourself with a razor, your hands would be cut up. We would have these loud newsrooms, and we'd have an AP machine that was going all the time, and it would have daisy wheel printer paper that fed up through it, and you would have to rip it, and you would have to put it, we had meat hooks, and you'd put it on the different meat hooks that were labeled for national news or for state news or for health news or science or whatever the category was. And you'd kind of rip it, tear it, put it where it needs to be. And that's the way that we used to keep the news in check, to know what we had. We had a dedicated time a day, the middle of the afternoon, where we fed our stories, and we used to literally feed them out over expensive fiber connect lines. And, you were working with typewriters. We were working with typewriters and not computers when I first started. So we didn't have the internet. You couldn't just go look up something. It was a challenge to get some of the information that you wanted. And you really had to get on the phone. You had to be talking with people a lot. And you really had to work your sources to try to find out what you needed. And fast forward to today, that is not the environment that we have today. We work out of a room where we have computers, we have the internet. We don't even have an AP machine anymore. AP comes in through computers. We don't have to keep track of different places tearing paper and looking through different pieces of paper to find what you need. A lot of people don't even use a written type script when they go on air to do something, because they've got, a computer that has all that. So we are totally reliant on computers. Although I got to tell you, we do have a typewriter stashed here, because if that electric goes out, I'm going to know how to do things, because
she's prepared to report on the apocalypse.
I am. You send it my way, and those zombies, I'll be all over it. Yeah. So there's a lot that technology-wise has changed. And then, I don't know if you want me to get into this, but there's a lot that's changed in the way that the people that we report on and the way we collect the news. So,
yeah, let's get into that a little bit. I know the relationships have changed. The model of journalism has changed because of this 24/7 instant news. We have everything at our fingertips. We can hear what's going on. We can see headlines. We get fed tens of thousands of messages a day, and we have to sort through it for what's good news, and I see good news as credible news, right? Not good and bad. And
that's good. That's good.
Yeah. But all the changes, I think those physical technological changes are a little bit easier to describe. I tell my son, who's a broadcast journalism major at Marietta College right now, about the razor blades and the tape. And I don't even think he believes me, because he just can't even fathom that was the way that we did it. So much behind the scenes, though, in the relationships, the way that we we interact with one another has changed.
Mhm.
Talk about that and some of those changes, good, bad, and ugly.
Well, I mean, when I first started in this business, relationships were key. I mean, you would meet people that you knew you were going to talk to them on a regular basis because of what they did. And you developed a rapport and you kind of knew, a little bit about them and who they were as a human being. Right. And you would know some of their interests and some of their likes. You might even know like their birthday or their spouse or, all kinds of different things because we had this rapport going back and forth because people were much more, you had to rely on talking to people back then. It wasn't a situation where you could get a lot of the information you now get via computer or via internet. So relationships have changed because we no longer have those kind of relationships. We can get by with, not having those kind of relationships. And honestly, a lot of people are much more guarded and private than ever because of the way that we consume news, because of the way news is handled. And it's perfectly, I understand that perfectly. I'm more guarded as well because you've got to be careful. You can't, what we did 20, 30 years ago with, having a working relationship where we talked with people on the outside and, had coffee with them and maybe knew something about them. Now that can be used against you in so many ways in this electronic media. So, there's a lot that has changed in relationships, but the way that people consume news has actually changed too. People used to subscribe. You would see the newspaper boy going like this down the street, and everyone got the newspaper and everyone would read the newspaper, the local newspaper at least. People don't subscribe to newspapers like that anymore. If they get it, they're probably reading, chances are they're reading it on their phone or their computer, or they're getting the digital version. But then a lot of people don't subscribe to newspapers at all. And they rely on social media. They rely on what they can get on different social media platforms, which is scary because if you think about social media, you kind of self-select what you want. And you tend to get in an echo chamber. And that you want to, if say you're a diehard Republican and you're reading a lot about President Trump and all the things the Republicans, you're going to get fed a lot more from that data analytic. And you're going to be getting things in your feed that are not necessarily true. And a lot of them, most of them probably, do not come from a journalism background. They come from a background of advocacy, which is totally different. And some of them are even conspiracy theories, that kind of thing. So people are getting that in their feeds now. And a lot of people, that's their daily diet of news. And I say that very carefully because I don't think that's news at all. But a lot of the real news that is put out there is aggregated into another collection. And you just don't see people, they're not consuming news straight from the source like they used to. They're not valuing the news straight from the source. And to make it even worse, our news has not, our outlets have not reacted well to this change. A lot of times people will go to a news site and they think, well, Columbus Dispatch, and I'm not picking on the Dispatch, I'll do this. I'm using this as an example. But they'll say, oh, that looks like an interesting story from the Dispatch. And then they go to the Dispatch and it's behind a paywall and they can't get into it. So then they start thinking, yeah, I don't have a Dispatch subscription. So anything I see from them, I'm just going to let it go. And then they'll go, the same way with another outlet. And so what ends up happening is the free news is what they get. And the free news is much more dependent on data analytics. And they're not getting that local, close to you value of news anymore. They're not often hearing about what's going on in their local school boards. They're not often hearing about the news that really is closest to them, which is so unfortunate. And I think, not to tout public radio, but we have, in a way, our importance is even greater now because we don't have paywalls and anyone can access our material. And we are covering the local things. I'm covering the state things. We're covering all of those things that people need to know and need to be taking advantage of on a daily basis. And I just got to say there's a lot less competition for that now because, it's so diverse and people have self-selected what they want, and it's made it a very almost scary kind of place, honestly.
There's so much confirmation bias because
Mhm.
it's available to us to just put together what we want to see that confirms how we view the world. And to put on my commissioner hat for just a moment, I try not to do that too much in my shiftology things, but I do see where people, they seem to have a better or more formed opinion about things that happen farther away from them, like
Yes.
at the White House or
Mhm.
at the federal level. And I so often see that there is just a complete lack of civic literacy when it comes to local government, when it
Right.
comes to how local government and state government work together. It's very interesting to watch that unfold. And I have three adult, well, nearly adult children, older teenagers. We always talk about, my husband and I will give them examples of things from when we were their age. And, of course, they could care
That always
less.
goes over well,
Right.
doesn't it?
Right. But it's so interesting to me how he and I have so much exactly the same frame of reference because
Mhm.
we had three or four television channels to watch
Right.
before we
Right.
had cable. And we had the same frame of reference for so many things, whereas they can just select the frame of reference that they choose to view the world in and their perspective, not only their news selection, but their entire perspective on life and the world is shaped by how they choose to see it.
Yeah, and
I don't know if that's scary or exciting, but I
yeah.
do think that even in that world, if we can help them understand credible resources and how to consume credible information and check sources, it's just that's going to keep them from going down the rabbit hole of the conspiracy theories and the scary things.
Yeah, and Melanie, the thing that really kind of gets to me is that with all of this technology and the internet and social media and all the things that it brings, and there are a lot of good things that it brings, I'm not trashing it. But with all of that, it seems like it's made people make their world smaller instead of larger. And you see these factions because people are self-siloing themselves, and they're not really understanding how things work in total. They only see that which they are interested in. And, that's really, it's kind of sad, honestly.
Yeah, the world's such an exciting big place, and
Mhm.
there's so much to learn if you just dig into it.
Yeah.
Another thing that has kind of come up in the last couple of decades, and I've seen this firsthand in Springfield, Ohio, as the presidential election unfolded and we became the epicenter of the immigration conversation. But one thing that we had never really seen in Clark County before was the idea of the citizen journalist.
Yeah.
Somebody who has a big following on Facebook or Instagram, and they purport to be a content creator, digital creator, right? I
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
don't accept those friend requests. But these digital creators are out there. They've got their own microphone. They can amplify their
Mhm.
message, and then people will just share and share and share these things. What do you think about that in terms of how, journalists are portrayed as purporting fake news? We hear that term. But then at the same time, the people who are railing at our traditional journalists are out there just making stuff up and sharing that using these data analytics to get in front of everyone they can with whatever BS they just made up last night.
Yeah. And that's the challenge. That is the challenge right there because a lot of times newsmakers even will give the exclusive to a citizen journalist who they like, they enjoy, whatever. And then they get some softball kind of, it's almost like cooperative kind of thing, an interview that's very cooperative. And that's put out there under the guise of news. Well,
Mhm.
that's not real news. Okay, that's not. But I can tell you that citizen journalists, they tend to be able to report, and again I use that word very carefully. They tend to report things that we could never report. I mean, I will sit on a story here trying to source it, trying to make sure it's true, trying to make sure I have the facts. And while I'm doing that, a citizen journalist will put it out and they won't have the facts and they won't have the sources. And sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. But even when it's not true, the people who follow that citizen journalist never really hold it against them. And, they accuse the media of being slow to the punch, not getting there, not asking the tough questions. But the thing is, that a lot of times we don't have access to ask the questions that we'd like to ask. Sometimes, we can't ask certain things or can't talk about certain things because it would not be credible to do so. I mean, I can't throw out questions or rumors or, that kind of thing when I don't have any indication that it's true. And it is irresponsible. We have a code of ethics. Citizen journalists do not have the same code of ethics. And it is difficult sometimes, especially when you see people who rally around the citizen journalists and they say, oh, those journalists over there, they're fake news. And they don't want to read anything. They don't want to, listen to anything we're saying unless it happens to back up a point that they're making. And I see citizen journalists do this all the time. That, will write a story about something that happens that they find can support whatever their point of view is. And they'll bring it in. Hey, look, the Wall Street Journal said blah, blah, blah. They agree with me. Well, they probably don't even know who you are, first of all. But, but the fact that, they'll draw it in when they agree with it. But the rest of the time, it's like, fake news. So you can't really have it both ways. People do try to have it both ways. I think citizen journalists are wonderful in some ways, and I'll tell you why. During the Black Lives Matter movement, we found that a lot of citizen journalists were able to, because there were so many of them, they were able to get different views and different, kind of interviews. They were out there in different ways. And some of that was very valuable. And you saw a lot of the citizen journalists being interviewed by real journalists because they had happened to be in the middle of something documenting it where a real journalist didn't have the access or didn't know what happened. So a lot of times things like that will make a difference. And then of course we've got, everyone thinks they're a citizen journalist in some way because everyone has a cell phone. And so what they do is, you probably do it too. I think we all do it. You see something interesting happening and you turn on your video real quick because you want to get that picture and you want to get that video. During the eclipse, that everyone was turning it on, trying to get different pictures of the eclipse. And of course, 5 of those were good and the rest of them were crappy, but that's the way it is, but so it does have they do have some value. I do not think though that citizen journalists are in any way real journalists. And I think they basically come at it from a different way of doing business. And, we just have to coexist in the same world. But people need to realize that there is a big difference between the way we do our jobs.
It's really important to me on the public relations side of public opinion, helping to shape public opinion, that we actually use honest information that we get from reliable, credible sources, science, data. All of those things are important. They're not nearly as sexy as someone's offhand opinion most of the time, but we can find ways to make it engaging so that people do want to consume that information. And that's kind of, I guess, where we sit in the middle of this conversation to try to connect with people where they are. And sometimes where they are is not where I'd like them to be.
Yeah.
But we want to reach, we want to start the conversation where they're at so that we can get them to kind of maybe come around and see things from a different perspective.
Right.
It's tough. It takes decades.
It is tough. And I think it's one of those things that we're still working our way, finding our way through it. Eventually, I think, we'll all coexist in it. I keep thinking that, I don't know, I think eventually people are going to see that, hey, all this stuff that I've believed or, maybe I've discounted all this stuff. It's not panning out the way that they said it would. Maybe I better go pay attention to the real journalist. I keep hoping that day is going to come. I don't know.
Well, I have some good news for you, Jo, because I just read something really encouraging. So at the end of last year, every year I do Mel's PR predictions for the coming year. And one of the things that I predicted was that there would be a rebirth of journalism and that
Good.
journalism would gain some traction again. Kind of a wild prediction, right? But I just read this from the Pew Research Center. It says Americans are now more likely to say they trust information from news organizations and social media sites than they were last year.
Good.
That is according to their new Research Center survey. These changes are largely driven by an increase in trust among Republicans, which has coincided with President Donald Trump's return to the White House. What's your reaction to that?
We don't even have that kind of time to go into that. But I think, there is some truth to that people who said they didn't trust journalism last year when there was a Democratic, president, maybe they trust it more now because there's a Republican president. I'm not sure, though, that that's the kind of trust and rebirth that I would be looking for as a journalist, because it's based on politics. It's based on political leanings. And, my work doesn't change. It's always factual. It's always data-based. I don't care if Mickey Mouse is the president or if Mickey Mouse is the governor. It's not going to change the way that I do my job or the way that the things that I report, because it's always the truth. That's what we focus on. And it seems like what you're talking about is maybe not, people don't want to believe it's the truth when it's not their guy at the top.
Totally different reaction than I had to it, because my thought was that Republicans who were maybe in the middle of the road, more moderate, would be thinking, we need to get away from this kind of extreme thinking and reporting and believing this. And now we're more likely to believe something that is backed up and sourced, because there's starting to be this divide within that particular party of the far extreme right and the middle of the road. So just interesting. I thought that was
well, that's it too.
Interesting
maybe that's
statistic
it
and
too.
something that we could hopefully continue to watch. What do you think journalism is going to look like 10 years from now?
I'm going to tell you what I hope it looks like. What I hope it looks like is I'm hoping that people will start realizing that the echo chambers, the silos that they're in, are really false, that they're not real, that they are existing in a small area, and that they will start to broaden their world a little bit, that they will start looking for people who are a little different than they are, and maybe consuming news that they're not used to consuming, and maybe expanding their horizons. That's what I hope will happen, because I think right now we're seeing people, if they start asking questions, if people just start asking questions, that's a big thing. You've got to question things.
And if you're the only ones asking the questions,
right.
Everybody needs to ask the questions.
Everyone needs to ask questions. And, sometimes I'll go out and I'll talk to groups, and at the end, they'll have questions. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just love you guys. You're awesome, because I want questions. I like it when people have questions. And I like it when people think about things. And I'm hoping that we will return to a place where people do that, because I think the more that people ask questions, the more they can separate truth from fiction. And that needs to happen, because that's,
I hope you're right now, Jo.
Yeah. So that's what I'm hoping for journalism in the future. I don't know. I can't tell you how it's going to turn out, but I'm really nervous about all of this artificial intelligence and people who are not asking questions. They are so easily tricked. And some of that AI looks super real. I mean, I've even seen AI and I thought, wow, that's great. And then I start looking at it and I'm like, wait, that's AI. That's not real. But it's pretty close.
Yeah.
People who aren't paying attention, they can really get some weird kind of thoughts in their head based on what they consume through AI. So I'm hoping that kind of stays at bay and that my version of what happens actually happens.
Yes. We won't get into a conversation about AI, but I could have you back to talk about AI and the First Amendment. I have all kinds of other things I want to ask you about, but I know we're about up with our time. So I have just a couple more things.
Okay.
Since we are a public relations organization, what one piece of advice would you give to public relations professionals when they approach you with a story idea?
This is going to seem really kind of funny, but Mondays and Fridays are great days to come to us with events that are happening. Or, if you want us to cover something, don't make it Wednesday when the legislature's in session, because it's probably not going to get covered. I mean, we're trying to keep up with all the different things that are happening here. So there are busy days and there are slower days. And, finding out, if you're working with journalists here at the State House, you find out very quickly what their days are that are good for them and what's not. Other things is, one of the things we often get people with pre-canned tape. They have sound bites for us. They've written stories for us. Well, some people might like that, especially I see smaller papers that pick that up and use it because they don't have anyone as far as staff. But for us, I want to get my own sound bites because I want to know the context. That's really super important to me. So if you throw me a sound bite that's a canned sound bite, I'm not going to use it. And if you throw me the glitzy, already written up kind of document, I'll read it. But again, that's not what I want. I want to talk to the people involved. I want the organic stuff from the source. I want the newsmakers. I want access to the facts and the data that you may have collected so that I can go and check to see if that holds up against the facts and data that I collect. And the other thing is, I'm going to get the other side. If you bring me a story and you're like pro, whatever it is, this is a good thing. I've got this interview for you. I've got all these stats and stuff. I'm going to look at that and I'm going to use that, but I'm going to search out the other side because I want to know the entire story. And I think a lot of times PR firms are offended, and not with you because you've never been offended with me, but there are some people who see that as a I don't trust you kind of thing. It's not I don't trust you. I'm a fact and verify person. And so I will take anything that you give me and I will want to verify it.
I'll add to that. A PR pro that has thought through the story is going to maybe predict what the other side of the story is and who you might be talking to. Yep. That was always very important to me, is to think about who else would you be getting a viewpoint from? Who's out there talking about this from another angle, and even kind of predicting in my pitch a response to what they might say. So, really thinking through that from somebody else, a lens that somebody else might have. I think that's really important for PR professionals to do, not just the surface stuff that your client wants you to tell people.
Exactly.
I have so much respect for journalists who can truly separate themselves from the story, get both sides of the story, and remain unbiased. And I know it's difficult because, you have a head, you have a heart, you're a critical thinker. And so, no matter what, you're going to formulate your own thoughts, but you're able to take yourself out of that. And so, journalists like Jo, I just have so much respect for. I started out thinking that I was going to be a journalist, and it didn't take me long to realize I can't remove myself in that way. And so I think that has given me an even higher level of respect because I know it wasn't something that I could do.
Right.
So as we wrap up here, Jo, how can our viewers and listeners learn more about you and engage with your work through television, radio, and the podcast?
Well, listen to your local public radio stations, number one, because we are the State House Bureau for all of the public radio stations in Ohio. So you will hear our reports daily on your local public radio stations. We also have a website if you prefer to read the stories. Our stories are at State News, all one word, STATE news.org. And we put everything on there. We have a weekly television show called The State of Ohio, and it is on your local PBS stations. I have a weekly podcast that I host, and it is called the Ohio Statehouse Scoop. It is on all of the public channels, podcast channels, Apple, Spotify, NPR, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find that. And we also have a new texting service. If people want to sign up for that, they can find the link on our Statehouse page. And they can sign up for a texting service where we'll send you a text if something big happens here at the State House that you need to know about right away. So we have a lot of different outlets for people to find us and interact with us. And we would really appreciate anyone who wants to ask those questions and get facts and know what's going on. Give us a listen, give us a read. We're here, and this is what we are committed to. And I can guarantee you that we will always be bringing you facts. We will not be bringing you anything else.
Jo, this has been so fun and enlightening. I have learned some things today. So whether or not you intended to, you have been a teacher over the last hour. Thank you again for joining Shooting the Shift podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, according to my sources, that's the end of this story and the end of another episode of Shooting the Shift. Again, you can read, listen, and watch all of the Ohio Statehouse news from Jo Ingles and her colleagues at statenews.org and via your local Ohio public radio station. And as always, you can visit us here at shift-ology.com to listen to more episodes, learn more about our services, and to contact us to set up a free discovery meeting to learn how we can help you reach more, convince more, and win more. On behalf of the entire gang here at Shiftology, I'm Dan Toland saying thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Shooting the Shift.